Hey there! Thanks for tuning into Duck Bricks. This is the massive, almost UCS-style LEGO Star Wars Chewbacca set. But the question is this as bad as everyone's saying? Now, LEGO has produced a lot of variants of Chewbacca over the years. From a snow-covered one, to one made for Solo depicting him in a younger form. There's been a lot of minifig Chewbaccas, but none quite as big as this. Retailing for $200 US, 210 euros or 180 British pounds, this is one of the most unique LEGO Star Wars sets and honestly just LEGO sets ever produced. And this got a lot of flack when it first released. So today, we're going to be asking the question of 2023, of course, the burning question in everyone's minds. Is this quite as bad as everyone says it is? Or does this model have any merit to it whatsoever? Join us now for our review of the latest LEGO Chewbacca set. So when images of this first released, this set got a ton of flack, and most of the comments were pretty much revolving around the head itself. But I really wanted to take the set and physically see how it felt in hand, how the building experience was, and simply just see how it was all put together. And for the most part, this was actually a really impressive build. You see, LEGO has done sort of similar scaled stuff like this before. We have a buildable Yoda, buildable Grogu, even a buildable Porg, but for a regular-sized humanoid-style character, really the last time that they made them brick-built, other than of course the CCBS action figure character and creature building system toys from the 2015 to 2018 era, was Darth Maul as a statuette back for a UCS set when LEGO was still trying to kind of work out what the UCS line meant. As such, we haven't really gotten a buildable, bipedal, standard character like Chewbacca pretty much ever before, especially not in modern history, making this one of the most interesting sets to be built. And throughout most of the building process, I will have to say it was a very impressive build. The way the fur is sculpted is expertly detailed. It is so impressive to me how the sculpting of the body was able to be worked out with the model itself. It even has a printed display plaque, and everything was going amazingly until I got to, well, this part, less in the instructions and more just in the pieces I poured out on the table. Yes, staring at those two printed elements unlocked a primal fear in me that I am not sure I have ever felt before. But jokes aside, the head is strange. It is definitely something that vaguely resembles Chewbacca, but something about it isn't quite right. And I feel like this really taps into the uncanny valley, where the LEGO designer really did their best to capture Chewbacca's features, but due to the limitations of using standard LEGO bricks, just wasn't quite able to accurately reflect the character itself. The really interesting thing to me is that from a lot of angles, this looks totally fine. From the side-on view, it looks great. Even from a certain side angle of it, it feels okay. It's just the front dead-on stare that just doesn't feel right to me. Maybe it's the graphic design for the eyes, maybe it's the way that the mouth is done, or the eyebrows. I honestly can't really articulate into words why this feels very wrong as Chewbacca's face, other than it simply does, and I'm not the only one who experienced this. Obviously, by the online reactions, this was many people's initial reaction as well. But honestly, as I built it more and more, I started to let the face kind of grow on me. And especially if you look past the face and look at the rest of the build itself, I actually started to feel really impressed by the way this model was done. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I really don't know of how you would have been able to make this piece better by just using standard LEGO bricks. Of course, we did get an actual buildable figure Chewbacca before. Back in 2017 for the Last Jedi wave of sets, we did get a Chewbacca, which was part of the CCBS or character and creature building system, which obviously was a completely different style of toy. It is just a few years ago, but it already does feel like a product of its time when LEGO was really investing a lot into the action figure building system and created a special dual molded head sculpt for Chewbacca itself, which obviously looks a lot better than this because it is one gigantic piece that sits atop the head. These products are a little bit hard to compare because they're trying to accomplish very different things. One of them is trying to be an action figure Chewbacca that you happen to be able to build, but really is supposed to be a posable action figure toy. This newest model for $200 is really supposed to be a display model. It is something that you intricately put together brick by brick to really appreciate and understand the building process behind making a model like this, and then you can't really do anything with it. Once you have it fully built, there's a limited amount of articulation, but in fact the arms themselves are actually fully locked in place. You can choose to unlock them if you wish, and you can move them around with ball joints, but then that means that the ball joint doesn't actually support the weight of the arm, it's not supposed to, and you can't even move the arm holding the bowcaster unless you remove two pieces at the back of the fur that literally lock it in place. As soon as you move that arm, those pieces will just fall off. So really the arms are basically not intended to be moved. And the same can pretty much be said for the head as well. The head can be rotated a little bit more than the arms themselves. You can at least make them look back and forth to a very slight degree, but really for the most part you are intended to just keep this figure fixed at one position, which honestly isn't that big of a deal for me because this is supposed to be a display model, not a play model, and you're building it to really appreciate the joys of the LEGO building system and how far LEGO has come to accomplish a character build like this. In fact, the thing that I will say about the construction of this build was that it was not boring. It actually was really interesting seeing how they were able to come up with all these different shapes, particularly for the arms and the legs. The torso got a little bit repetitive, just doing the fur on the back and the front, but for the most part it was a very interesting and engaging build, and despite most of the pieces being pretty much just made up of the same color, the build was interesting enough that I always felt like I was building something new from step to step. The really interesting thing about this is that this set would not have been possible to make a few years ago. It relies so heavily on pieces that were introduced in 2020, 2021, even 2022 to make up pretty much all the shapes of the fur, and you basically needed to have all those pieces available to even consider making this model, which is really interesting how a full-scale LEGO model pretty much is almost entirely, at least on the exterior, made up of pieces that have been introduced in the past few years, which certainly is a very interesting thing for LEGO to do, but one that I feel really does take advantage of the building system. Now overall, this is quite the interesting model, and personally I think that it actually is a remarkable feat of engineering to accomplish a character that is fully sculpted like this, with bended knees, with sculpted arms. This is absolutely a triumph, and honestly a masterclass in building realistic, animalistic characters out of standard LEGO bricks. It really, unfortunately, is only held back by the head, and honestly, I kind of feel bad for the set designer because they clearly put so much love and effort into making this a reality, only for the set to just be clowned on relentlessly because the head doesn't look quite right. But I honestly feel like this set is getting a little bit more flack than it deserves. It was a joy to put together. I feel like personally as a builder, I learned a ton when actually constructing this model. I wish that I constructed this before I competed on a LEGO building show, but this is such an interesting model to be able to pose around and take a look at, and I certainly am incredibly impressed by the amount of engineering effort that went into making it. Really, if I could only offer up one complaint, it was that when I was building the torso, it felt very square and rectangular to me, even more so than I was expecting, but honestly, once the model is fully complete and the bandolier is on, you don't really notice that the torso is basically just a large rectangle with not a lot of depth to it. That was something that was a little bit surprising to me, how pretty much no attempt was made to sculpt the torso itself. It basically is just a giant rectangle with panels on the front, back, and sides that have some sort of three-dimensionality with the fur, but I do feel like the large torso, aside from the head, is one of the weaker parts of the model, but the legs and the arms really do stand out as being very impressively done, and you can't fault it for that. And so to sum up all my thoughts on this model, 0 out of 10, not thick enough compared to the LEGO model at Disneyland. Okay, so that was our review of the $200 massive LEGO Chewbacca statue. Honestly, not as bad as I think people are making it out to be. I kinda like the set. I did sort of defend the set when I first saw images of it, but I did want to wait to have it in hand to really give my full opinions because I feel like you really have to have this in hand to understand what kind of a model it is. Is it perfect? Not at all. Could they have done a much better job? I don't know. I genuinely don't think so. But of course, I do want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you have ideas on how to mod this to make the face in particular look better, especially from the front on view, I would love to hear it. I'd love to see people do a mod or a mock of this set, which really would probably transform it into something that I feel would be a really good Chewbacca sculpture, because it's almost here, but it needs to be here. It's at 90%, needs to be at 100%, but for me, this honestly doesn't deserve the hate it's getting. I did just buy this myself. This was not sent to me by LEGO. This is not not a sponsored review. I honestly just like the set. That's all I have to say. Thanks all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this review, and talk to you again very soon. Bye for now.